On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, if the Philadelphia Eagles were going to regress in 2023, why would that be? What should we be looking to avoid after a Super Bowl run in 2022? Plus, who's still underrated on this very talented roster? All that and more on a Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in everybody to a Monday edition of the show. Shout out to our everydayers for making us your first listen 5 days a week. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Gino, we've spent months now, and honestly now going on 2 years or a full calendar year hyping up this roster, how good it looks on paper. Then in 2022, it all comes to fruition. This team is incredibly talented, and they dominate. They're the 1 seed in the NFC. They go to the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl with ease. And now this offseason, they lose some starters on both sides of the ball, but the upgrades or, some of the replacements they made, we're almost as excited about this team as we were last year. But of course, at the same time, me and you are realistic. We've gone through after, winning the Super Bowl in 2017. Me and you started this show and we saw, 2018 and 2019. Listen back to those offseason shows. We were very hyped for those teams as well, and they weren't able to continue that magic. I'm not saying that this 2023 Eagles team is going to do that, but for you, if you think this team were to take not a step back, but to struggle more this year and, have there be a little more adversity, what would be the context of that path, do you think?
It's a very in-depth conversation because when you look at how the Eagles have had success in their two, I would say, best seasons over the last 6 years, obviously the 2 Super Bowl runs, they were vastly different, right? One team was consistent. They played well most of the season outside of a couple games where Jalen Hurts wasn't there or his arm was injured just a little bit. But you go back to 2017, it was an ultimate roller coaster, and that team was injured. 2022 was healthy.
Right.
I look at 2018, 19, and 20 as a way to say, don't fall back into that trap, right? You've done a great job bringing in this new medical staff, which has done a fantastic job in cohesion with Nick Sirianni coming up with a game plan to keep these guys healthy. They can't go away from that. I think that's priority number one. Get these guys on the field, right? Get them healthy, get them to week 1, and allow them to play all of those games. And one thing that they have to do in those games is continue to win those one-score outings. Continue to win the turnover battle. Those are 2 areas, and especially with injuries as well, that if you're on one end of the spectrum 1 year, it kind of starts to average out towards maybe the middle. It could go to another extreme, but more than likely it'll start to even off. So when you look at injuries, you look at turnovers, you look at one-score wins, if they come back to average even, Lou, they should be a pretty good team. But to be the great team, you still have to dominate in, I would say, those 2 areas on the field. And then when it comes to injuries, sometimes the luck of the draw, sometimes you turn into San Francisco and what happened to them in that last game where you're down to your 6th string quarterback on the year, right? And we've seen that in Philadelphia in 2017, having Big V started left tackle and then Carson Wentz going out in that playoff.
And look at all the other seasons.
Davian Clowney hit. Exactly. Jeff Garcia back in 2006.
Right. I mean, I think injuries is the main part. And look, 2018, 2019, 2020, that 3-year stint after the Super Bowl, I mean, there were a lot of reasons that team kept going down and down, right? I mean, 2018, they turn it around, make a deep playoff run. 2019, they do win the division. They overcame adversity. But I think this team, much better built. I think on both sides of the ball, it's a much more sustainable construction of the roster to win. To me, it's way more talented than those teams. And in the conference, like they are set up beautifully. We've spent months saying why we think they're not going to take a step back, but you're right. If they were, because it's going to be tougher this year. I don't think they're going to take a step back where they miss the playoffs or even they have to struggle like they did those 2 years after Super Bowl 52. But yeah, they're probably not going to nearly go undefeated again. Their schedule is going to be a big part of this, Gino. Their schedule is, I think, a lot harder this year. There are some really damn good teams that they're playing, contenders in both conferences. But it's the injuries. I mean, this team last year, Gino, listen to the starters and like total missed games in the regular season and in the playoffs, because they were fully healthy in the playoffs and the Super Bowl. Like that rarely happens. They got really lucky there. I mean, they are younger, and they did a good job in the summer, but there's some luck here. The guy that missed the most games, Avonte Maddox, with 7. Then it was CGJ and Goddard with 5, Hurts with 2, Sweat and Lane with 1. I mean, it's got to be a health thing. I don't think they're going to go back to the 2018-2019 norm where it's a historic rate where it doesn't matter what player, their injury history, their health, where they all start getting hurt, but it probably won't. There's going to be some median between 2022 and like 2018. So I agree. It's got to be just the health of the roster.
It would have to regress to the norm, and
yeah,
especially in those one-score games as well, because if you look back at those runs when the Eagles were on 4 straight NFC East titles, they started that run going 11-5, then they went 12-4, then they went 12-4, then they went 13-3. An 11-5 season to me, so let's say even 11-6 or let's say 12-5. Lou, that's a successful year if you drop off 2 wins. If you start talking about dropping off 3, 4, then you get into the conversation about seeding, maybe playing that additional game with only having 1 bye, because the aspiration still is, and I would say regression is not getting that 1 seed.
Yeah,
and
right.
How do you
and
get
regression
there,
feels
right?
like an aggressive word, Gino, for like what
Definitely.
we're talking about next year.
Yeah, no, it's not a regression, or even in the conversation of a retooling or rebuilding, which you were talking about in 2020, right? This is more, how would the Eagles come back to earth? I think that's a way to kind of say it, right? Because there are moments where you're saying, man, they're getting every single bounce. The team is fully healthy,
dude.
and Jalen Hurts is playing out of his mind. And
look at the Super Bowl. They had the entire lineup. Yeah. I mean, that's
one time it goes wrong.
Yeah,
they lose in the biggest game in the biggest moment.
No, exactly.
Right?
And honestly, Gino, if they regress, quote unquote, in the regular season, and if they suffer injuries, maybe the turnover balance is a little more lopsided, even though I don't think this team is suddenly going to be just turning the football over all the time. They have Jalen Hurts at quarterback and a very mature team on both sides of the ball. But even if they do that, a lot of the times you look in the regular season, look at the best years of the Chiefs in the regular season. Those weren't the years they always won the Super Bowl. I mean, you look at some teams, sometimes it's when they have more adversity to overcome, when they win those championships. A lot of the times the 1 seed isn't the one that pulls it off, and even if it is a 1 seed, the one that just like coasts to the Super Bowl, that doesn't always mean that you're going to have a worse season at the end. And the good thing is, too, this team is built for adversity, and we've said it before about the veterans. They went through all those years, and I think these young guys are equipped to handle that kind of stuff, too. So even if they do face some more injuries, the roster is deep enough to deal with it, and I think this team has the right mindset to not let it derail a season, just like that 2018 and 2019 team did. Say what you will about those teams, but they found a way when a lot of other teams would just say, we're dead in the water.
If you want to get a little more in depth on what I think would make this team come back to earth, I think if you look at the offense and defense, I'm going to make 1 point on each. And with the defense, I think it's that secondary is not as good as it was in 2022. And in a passing league, I think it's going to be easy to tell that could be something that happens within the first 4 weeks where you're saying, okay, this isn't as good as they had last year, but they have to find a way to be able to make it through these games. And
it
looking
would
at
be the
offense,
one unit, you could say might step back like is a Bradberry regression coming after 2020, that last career year he had? He took a step back in 2021. The safeties aren't as good. I'm confident, but yeah, you're right. If there was a unit that took a step back, it might be secondary.
Yeah, and then I look at the offense, and I'm saying if they can't get help outside of the big 3, it's going to be a difficult equation to make it through to the end once again, because we just talked about injuries. We just talked about the turnover situation. I mean, there's going to be times maybe that they throw it up and a ball that would have been caught last year's an interception to A.J. Brown. And you talk about A.J., he's been off the field at times, and Devontae suffered injuries in his career. And you just never know in the National Football League. But what would make them go back to earth? And it's all the things that we don't want to talk about, right? That we are the positivity pod. We love to talk positive here at LOE, but you have to be real. And that's what really killed us in those off seasons in 2018, 19, and 20.
Well, you win a championship. That's going to happen.
Yeah,
you're going to hype the hell out of the team.
Big for our britches. Yeah, definitely.
Gino, coming up next, I do want to talk about, that's a storyline that we don't talk about a lot regarding the 2022 season, is the path they had in the regular season. I want to get into a specific part of that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's show is sponsored by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's been a roller coaster of a year for me betting on the Phillies, but I'm going to keep it going until the end of the year. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's right, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Go bet on Gino's Yankees. FanDuel.com/ just kidding. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission. All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. We're back to 5 days a week right here on your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Shout out to the everydayers for making us your first listen. So, Gino, we were talking about in segment 1, like if this team's going to take a step back, and I didn't mean like they're going to miss the playoffs, they're not going to win the division, they're going to be worse Super Bowl contenders this year. I just mean if the regular season is harder, if there's more adversity to overcome, what is that adversity? I think we agreed. It's injuries, the median between like 2018 and 2022 and evening out. It's the toughness of the schedule. It might be, the turnover ratio because it was so lopsided last year. It might come down to a more normal number ratio. I think too, you mentioned a couple of positional groups. That was a good point I didn't even think of, like maybe the secondary regresses just a little bit. And we're not talking dramatic step backs. Again, just want to keep contextualizing that. You also talked about not having the more than the big three step up in the passing game. So, those are definitely storylines to watch. And the crazy part is when I was coming up with that topic for the show today, I started thinking back to 2022. I'm like, man, they really did not have to overcome much. And they deserve a lot of credit for that. Even the injuries. I mean, Howie Roseman built a young roster. Nick Sirianni took care of this team and their bodies, the veterans too, during the summer. And so they deserve a lot of credit for that. But the path in the regular season, I mean, there just was very little lows. People don't talk about it enough, man. Like they were you could say 3 or 4 plays away from nearly like having a perfect season. And it's like a storyline that we don't talk about a lot.
There's some moments in there that you scratch your head, like Indianapolis.
That's true. Maybe that's a good counter. Is there some things they got away with?
The Washington game, as close as it was and as much as we would like to have said that they could have pulled it out at the end, they played terrible. I mean, they didn't do themselves any favor. But like outside of that, fumble
away and you win that game.
Yeah, we talk about getting all the bounces.
Yeah.
What if Quez catches that ball at the end of the game against Kansas City? Even right, you talk about starting from the end,
or hurts his fumble, forward. Or just you get one defensive stop
in the outings that you did see things go awry.
Yeah,
it was Gardner Minshew having to basically almost outduel Dallas, which he did, and then the New Orleans game, if Jalen's in there, you probably say they win that game. I was going to say the game was
close. It's down to the wire. And I do wonder, I don't know if the Eagles would have done this, but like if they're undefeated still in that game, is Jalen playing? Probably not, but I don't know.
They've never been that team, though,
right,
that is
especially
going
that roster
to get the perfect season, right? Something always goes awry.
Yeah, I know.
Donovan getting hurt in the NFC Championship game, or Carson Wentz after having a MVP caliber year getting hurt. Even Jalen Hurts having an MVP caliber year, and he's definitely hurt throughout the entire playoffs. And that's one story I think we should definitely laud Jalen Hurts for. You talk about nearly going perfect. Well, when they did have to overcome adversity, Jalen Hurts did it, man, and he was hurting. he was hurting in
And
those
you wouldn't
games.
know it when you look at that bomb in the Super Bowl to A.J. Brown.
A
Incredible.
lot of those guys
Devontae.
were. A lot of those guys were struggling to get through there. Lane Johnson has the what did he have? A knee surgery, if I am
Well,
not
and it
mistaken.
was what, a hernia?
Oh no,
or
he
the
had the
lower abdomen
torn
injury.
his
Torn
adductor was torn off of his body. Lou.
It is always crazy hearing about like post-season like injuries that were happening during the year. Like I remember when they won Super Bowl 52 and Alshon was playing with a torn something in his shoulder, right?
Yeah, his rotator cuff was basically torn off, and he made that catch.
And you think about the catch he made against Eric Rowe in the Super Bowl, you're like, I hit my knee on a door and I'm down for 10 minutes. I mean,
I burned my finger on the stove the other day, and I can't use one of my 10 digits.
But that's the thing about that year was just, even in the losses, it's like Jalen Hurts played great in that Washington game. I was there. I mean, that Monday night game, he was incredible. And then you look at the Dallas game, you lose in a shootout with Gardner Minshew. You have Jalen Hurts in that game, you're probably winning. As you mentioned, you have Jalen Hurts in the New Orleans game, you're probably winning. The Super Bowl came down to a play or two. It's just like, it's something because it didn't, prolong into the end of the regular season and the playoffs that it wasn't talked about as much. It kind of died, and then we started talking about like clinching the 1 seed, and so it kind of went under the weeds. But there was a path where that was probably the best chance the team has had of going perfect in quite some time, since, I don't know, the 2015 Panthers maybe that went 15-1.
And you talk about everything lining up, right? And people say what they want about the strength of schedule. Well, the schedules are laid out years and years in advance. You just happen to luck into playing whatever AFC division that you did last year, and you beat most of those teams, and you beat all of the teams in your division at least one time. And Washington was that one game where you're saying if things do go awry, it has to be in a divisional matchup where you have to throw the playbook out. As cliche as it is, and
you say
getting
it all the
to
time,
that point,
man.
just toss it to the window. It doesn't matter how good your quarterback plays in that game. We've seen quarterbacks outduel each other, and then at the end of the day, it's a defense making a play to win it in the divisional matchups. And Jalen Hurts, if he is 100% healthy, well, let's say he does that this year, Lou. We talk about regressing to the mean with most guys being injured. Well, Jalen was hurt. What if he does see 17?
That's a great
games?
point.
What if he does play every single game?
He's missed games in the last 2 years. Yeah, that would be huge for sure. So, I think that's a good point, is some things might regress, but others might improve. Like you look at if Jalen plays all 17 games this year, and I think the passing attack could get even better. So there's a lot of things, and some of these young players can be upgrades potentially over what you had last year. So yeah, there's other ways that this team could also improve, and your record might not be the same as last year. You might not have as easy a path to go perfect. I can guarantee you they're not going perfect. Just look at that schedule in the second half of the year. But in other ways, you might be more equipped to win a championship this year as opposed to last year. Gino, to wrap up the show, I saw on CBS, I think it was last week, they came out with a top 100 list. And of course, this is the time of year for that kind of stuff, as there's very little storylines across the NFL. And with the Eagles, they had a ton of players on the list. So just to recap, the number 1 player for the Eagles was Lane Johnson. He was number 18. Jalen Hurts was number 31, which I thought was low. Jason Kelce, 42. A.J. Brown was 47. Mailata, 60. Reddick, 64. Devontae, 69, Dickerson, 77, and then Slay, number 96. And I didn't really want to talk about the list specifically, but it kind of got me thinking about who's overrated on this loaded team and who's a little underrated. When it comes to like that list of players, was there a guy, and maybe just overall in this team, which is very hyped up right now, so it's hard to say anybody's underrated, but do you think there's a guy on this team still on offense or defense that's not getting enough flowers?
Well, first off, what was A.J. Brown ranked versus Jordan Mailata?
Yeah, hold on. Let me recap. I went a little faster. Hurts number 31, I think, is way too low for someone that just did that in the Super Bowl. A.J. Brown was number 47, Kelce number 42, and Mailata 60. I don't know. When you have like elite players at those spots, that feels low to me.
I would say Jordan Mailata has continued to be underrated as a left tackle in this league. Is
Dickerson
it because
at 77. He'll be higher next year. I got news for you.
Absolutely. You talk about one of the most they could be in the conversation every single year for having the most underrated offensive guard. since Isaac Seumalo was drafted in 2017.
Everyone talks about
in
Kelsey and Lane, and it was Jason Peters. So the guys at guard, they kind of get left in the
Brooks,
dark.
Isaac Seumalo for how good he played, man. And now you look at Landon Dickerson, he's going to be another one of the Eagles' greats. I think looking at that line, Landon is easily the most underrated player on that line. Overrated, though, I just don't think Eagles get as much respect as they ever should. Even in that
I can't think of an overrated player on this team right now. I mean, maybe Fletcher Cox nationally, just because he's a well-known name, and they probably still think he's as elite as he once was. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's like an overrated player on this team.
Maybe Bradberry if he's not your cup of tea on the outside,
I agree with that.
As a second-team All-Pro player, as well as he did play. Is that his only great season that we will see, or can he get back to that form, which we have seen? It's a big question,
because he did that, and I'm not saying he's going to do this again, but 2020 to 2021, he definitely did take a step back. So
he was horrendous. We were playing against him.
Yeah,
we wanted to throw at him
and
every single time.
The safeties are different this year. The communication is going to be part of it. A new defensive coordinator. I'm not banking on Bradberry just dropping off a cliff already. He's a great zone corner, and he was incredible last year. And he doesn't have to cover number one receivers a whole lot of the time. So in that way, I don't think. But I'm with you. I think he's another one that maybe based on what he did last year, probably won't do that well again. I think the underrated guy, though, still, man, is our boy Josh Sweat. I mean, he was not on this list.
Was Dallas Goedert on the list either?
No, he actually wasn't, which is a good point. I did not even notice.
Why isn't Dallas Goedert talked about as one of the
top three
tight end in football?
Yeah, and he's not.
Why isn't he discussed with Kittle? Why Kelsey's in his own right? Like, put Kelsey where he belongs. He's the best of the best. But right now, are there
Goddard
three other tight ends in
2A,
football?
2B.
Who else do you take outside of Goddard? It's Kittle, Goddard, and
there's a huge drop off after that. I don't know.
I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody that I'm taking. And same with Josh Sweat, Lou. There might not be 15 guys, maybe 20 that are better than him.
And yet, how many non-Eagles fans truly know who Josh Sweat is?
Probably not, because Hassan Reddick, who's one of those top 7 guys in the league right now.
Individually, Gino, very underrated. I mean, he was, to me, the defensive player of the year last year, and he was ranked number 64.
He should have won D-Boy. He should have won the D-Boy.
19 and a half sacks last year, if you include the playoffs. Some of the biggest plays of the year, clutch moments. What's funny is PFF actually ranked Sweat and Reddick today as the best edge rushing duo in the league. So they're getting their flowers as a combo. But individually, both are still, I think, very overlooked. I think Brandon Graham's still the biggest name nationally at defensive end.
Devontae Smith is still underrated. People are going to say AJ is the number one, right? But if you in-depth watch Devontae as much as we do, we know truly how great this player is and who he is still yet to become, man. I mean, I can't wait when he's 8 years into his career. I just think of a guy like Marvin Harrison, who as his career goes on, you're like, this guy can't get better as a route runner. And then he's an even better route runner than he was 4 or 5 years ago. And I think Devontae, when you look back at that conversation, people are going to say, why didn't we pick up on this trend sooner, that this guy could break out? And same with Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert is getting the Zach Ertz treatment. Ertz was never regarded as that number 1 or 2 guy ever. Yep. Even in that season when he had 100 catches, it's like, oh, he only gets 6.7 yards.
Well, it is interesting. You look at both of them, and they played in an era where Ertz always had to get past Kelsey and Gronk. Right, for the majority of his career, he had one of those guys at least in front of him. And now with Goddard, it's Kelsey, and now Kittle kind of goes in there replacing Gronk as that other guy in that big 3. But it is cool, though. The Eagles have always had that 2A or 2B or number 3 guy at tight end over the last 10 years. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, he should be on that list. If he's a top 3 tight end, and he's, to me, the best deep threat at tight end in the league, and run after the catch, he's right there. So
you'd have to believe. I got two more for you that might be a little underrated. Avonte Maddox, simply because I don't think he's on the field enough for people to get that full
very good
understanding
last
of what
year.
he is.
Yeah,
very
elite efficiency last year.
He's been very good in the slot for years.
Yeah, he just missed 7 games, so yeah.
And a younger player who is going to get his flowers, but right now is underrated by the league, Milton Williams.
I thought that's
people are going to know who that kid is after this year, in my opinion.
Yeah. I like that for sure. I think there's still some underrated players on and maybe it's too because this team is so good as a whole.
You just forget about it.
No, it's a good point. Individually, some of these guys that are very good, it's such a collective mind hive almost of star talent that every one guy might not always be as focused on. But yeah, I think it's definitely interesting that there's still some guys that both sides of the ball going to be huge pieces of this team that just maybe nationally don't get as much recognition. All right, Gino, we got 4 more shows this week right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Subscribe wherever you get the podcast and on YouTube as well. Shout out to the Everydayers for making us your first listen Monday through Friday. We're also available on Twitter at LockedOnBirds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. Until tomorrow, for Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thank you as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.